All right. So objective two is all about industrialization. Um, Again, a little funny meme. Future so bright, I can't see my son. My bad. That's just smog. So there's going to be some things that come with industrialization, and this is something we've dealt with. Los Angeles is a horribly industrialized city, yet they have their own little smog cloud. And so we'll get into maybe the ends and the good things, the bad things, etc. All right. Objective 2.1 deals with labor unions, and here you see Dwight. I love The Office, but thank God it's Friday. False. Thank God for labor unions are fighting for a 5-day work week. We're going to get into how that functions in class, etc. So our first labor union is called the National Labor Union. You can see a little sign there. The first one to come up the 8-hour leagues is what they were called. Happens 1866, and that's really about all it does. Really nothing successful outside of just combining those ideas. The next one to discuss is the Knights of Labor. It's led by a man named Terence Powderly. They had a focus on inclusion. You know, Oprah Winfrey, you're in the union, you're in the union. Problem is, it's too diverse of a membership, too many goals. I like to think of this as someone taking, if you have multiple kids and someone saying, well, y'all kids, where do you want to go eat? And everybody starts shouting different things in different places. Nothing would work. Different people are going to want different things. That's human nature. And so you can imagine here the problem if you have African Americans who at this point have only been freed um, 10, 20 years. You have women who still can't have the right to vote. You have immigrants who are fighting for citizenship. And then you also have poor whites who are coming up there. And everybody wants their own different thing. There's children in there. And so you can see why that doesn't work. We then have the American Railway Union. This is a craft union. Now, the previous union was everyone, skilled or unskilled. Unskilled is a job anyone can do. Skilled is something like a VOTEC, something that you've been trained to do. A la welding would be a skill, okay? But you must be skilled to be in this craft union. It's led by Eugene V. Debs. This is the first time we're going to introduce socialism. Socialism is the idea that everyone works for the common goal of, of the union in this case, and instead of being your own self. They are also the first to favor strikes as a means to getting what they want, and we'll get into the strikes later on. We have the Industrial Workers of the World. Now, this is a purely socialist union. Okay, guy's name was Big Bill Haywood. It's all inclusion, skilled and non-skilled. They do favor strikes. Again, the major problem here, you can see the red associated with socialism. Later on we're going to put people to death over being socialist in the 1900s. But this is going to be another big one to look out for. We have Mother Jones. Mother Jones, not her given name, she kind of took that as a nickname. She helped to start all women's union. It was called the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. She also is going to champion the idea of child protective measures. It's really important there, getting women on the same page with men, getting children out of the factory where it is very dangerous. Then we come on to the one union that's going to be successful called the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. This is in 1886. It's an umbrella union of craft unions, meaning over here we have people who work with railroads, over here we have people who work with different whatever, and they brought in under this AFL, led by Samuel Gompers. The reason it is successful, they use collective bargaining. Collective bargaining, or CBAs, are big in any industrial thing, including professional leagues. There's a CBA agreement. For example, in basketball, Chris Paul is the CBA president. That means Chris Paul represents all the NBA players when he goes and talks to whoever represents all of the owners. So it's a one-to-one, and you can bring the demands of the entire group and then come back. It just works a whole lot easier. They also only focus on bread and butter issues, which in this case are hours, less hours, pay, decent more pay, and safety. They don't want to be pushed to the limit where they're going to get hurt. Now, later on, and I know I'm jumping here, 1935, the Congress of Industrial Organizations is going to split off of the AFL, led by John Lewis. He has the focus on the non-skilled workers. Now, later on, 20 years after, they're going to rejoin the AFL. They're now called the AFL-CIO, But you can see right here, one of the big things in the 1930s they're going to do is they're going to get the automobile organized in a big, massive union called the United Automobile Workers, or UAW. There's other ones in there, but there you are. Now, objective 2.2, we have immigration causes and effects. Now here, and we're just making funny of this. So you have a Native American here. You're against immigration. Splendid. When do you leave? And so it's an interesting little kind of paradigm how that works. Anyway, we're going to talk what brings people to this country and what are those effects. Now we have old immigrants. We have new immigrants. Old immigrants are AKA a WASP, which you can see second bullet point, white Anglo-Saxon, meaning English, Protestant. They spoke well, they spoke good English, and they assimilated well. The new immigrants came from Southern Eastern Europe and Asia. They did not assimilate well. Now here you have this whole mentality of the guy coming off the boat, and he's being told by these very nicely dressed people that he is not welcome. Whereas you can see their shadows represent what they looked like when they came to this country. It's just a very poignant thing, and it is a period piece in that time, saying just basically echoing the idea that we all came from somewhere. And so it's always an interest. It's always a favorite of mine. Now, push factor and a pull factor. A push factor makes you want to leave your current residence. And right there you can see it can be environmental, social, economic, or political. For example, poverty, fear, disasters, unemployment. Bigger ones, death, disease, etc. A pull factor brings you into a certain country, region, or area. Again, it can be environmental, social, economic, or political. And on the little picture there, you see safety, opportunity, stability, freedom. In this case, freedom, jobs, food. And so they're going to leave. These places are overcrowded, and they're going to make their way to the United States. When they get to the United States, they have to go through a processing center. Now, processing centers have recently got a lot of notoriety in the news, namely because of the conditions that are being debated there and the separation of children. But this is not actually nothing new, separating children. We actually did do this in Ellis Island and other places. Anyway, I mean, they would separate families, and we can talk about that. Now, Ellis Island is the entry to the U.S. for most immigrants coming from Europe. Keep the E's together. It is close to the Statue of Liberty. In fact, they would see the Statue of Liberty. And Emma Lazarus is commissioned, meaning she was basically paid, to write a poem called The New Colossus. And this is the famous poem that says, "Bring me your tired, poor, huddled masses," etc. And this is going to become the idea of people coming to this country to see the Golden Lady. Now, there is a similar site on the West Coast. It is called Angel Island. It's the bottom picture there, and it is for Asians. And so again, keep the letters together. But again, you see the thing in the news about processing centers, and we'll talk about processing centers in class. Maybe compare the stories of Ellis Island with the stuff we're hearing in the news and why they're getting more notoriety today than they did back then. Now, as these immigrants come in, nativism is going to happen. Now, nativism is extreme dislike of immigrants, and you can see their flag there. Native Americans beware of foreign influence, and this is based on xenophobia. Now, xenophobia is the fear of something different or alien to you. In fact, that's where we get the term illegal aliens. Different, okay? Now, I always think of xenophobe because if you like the movie Alien, the horror movie, there's a thing in there called the xenomorph. Now, the xenomorph is the alien, the scary thing. And so that just really kind of helps you to understand the term xenophobia. Now, groups of nativists, and we have the Anti-Catholic League, pretty specific what they want. Also, the KKK is going to make a larger scale. And so the KKK was widespread in the 1800s, as well as nativism. They come back early 1900s, again 1920s to 1950s, and there's still nativism today. Now, nativism in politics. In the 1850s, they actually had a political party called the American Party, or Know Nothing. Now, they were nicknamed the Know Nothing because if people asked them what they were associated with, they were to answer, "I know nothing." Pretty simple, right? Now, in 1882, they're going to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act. It is exactly as it sounds. You're going to exclude common Chinese laborers from coming to this country. In 1907, there is a gentleman's agreement, and this was to avoid war with Japan Teddy Roosevelt basically worked on this, where San Francisco had an earthquake. Japan was threatening war. They were feeling pretty good about themselves, having beaten Russia. And he said, hey, we won't segregate the Japanese in San Francisco if you can help us keep them in their own country. Now, again, we see modern parallels. This has happened in the news again, where we see the Mexican military has now been called in to the border on Mexico and the United States, but very similar there. Then in the 1920s, we have two sets of quotas. We have the Emergency Quota Act. This basically said only 3%. You can see the bottom picture there where the funnel's being cut down. This worked so well that 3 years later they're going to pass the National Origins Act, which cut it to 2%. Now, these quotas are going to stay in place until 1965 when President Johnson is in office. And so you can think about that, kind of reducing where we're going. Now, objective 2.3. Now we're going to get into the labor strikes and urban life. Now, nobody gives a care about the fate of labor as long as they get their instant gratification. Meaning, we honestly a lot don't think about where our stuff comes from. And I've got a humorous video I'll show you in class about iPhones, and it's kind of funny. Anywho, let's go. So, 1877, we have the Great Railroad Strike. It was the B&O Railroads, which was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroads. It spread to several states. It was caused by the Panic of 1873. Long and short of Panic of 1873, it has to deal with money. And so the banks are beginning to close. People are fearful. People began, you can see in the picture here, they destroyed parts of the track. President Rutherford B. Hayes sent federal troops to end the strike. And so right here we see if there is a strike, the president will get involved, and the president will always side with the owners rather than the workers, just because they make the money. Now, 1886, we have probably one of the most infamous ones called the Haymarket Affair. This is in Chicago. It is a union rally and a protest. First, they're going to go rally because they had had a rally before. One of their workers were killed, and so they're going to protest. Now, anarchists are going to mix in. Anarchists do not like any form of government. In fact, they like the absence of government. And so as they're protesting, the anarchists are going to throw the bombs at the police. The violence increased, and when it hits the news, the unions are blamed for this, and this is going to bring down the popularity of unions for several years, just because they're now seen as being forceful and over the top. Now, the Homestead Strike is, again, a very interesting one. 1892, this is Andrew Carnegie, we'll talk about him, his steel plant. He hired a guy named Henry Frick. Henry Frick is going to use a lockout, very simple, to the union. He's also going to hire scabs. These are non-union workers. He's going to hire Pinkerton detectives. These are basically guns for hire, assassins, if you will, to protect. And you can imagine what's going to happen here. You have people who want their money, but they want to be paid equally. You have people who are who just to keep a job, but then they're also conflicting with somebody taking the other job. And then you have these guards there. Now, the violence will ensue. Again, the state militia is called in to put down the strike, and they will side with the owners. However, Andrew Carnegie did want to fire Henry Frick, but Henry Frick was ultimately killed by one of the striking workers. But then, 1894, we have the Pullman strike, and so you can see Pullman here, and he's squeezing the worker between high rent and low wages. He built a company town, and this sounds really smart, meaning I'm going to make their living things right where they work, and so they'll be able to do what they need to. Problem is that breeds a whole level of contention, if you will. Now, the American Railway Union, ARU, Eugene Debs, organizes a strike in railroads versus the railroads and the president. Now, the court steps in here, which is something new. The court issues an injunction, which is a formal order to stop a strike. Very famous court case here called Henry Debs, where they actually say, yes, we can do this. President Cleveland at this point sends in the troops to end the strike. After Debs refuses the injunction, Debs is going to go to jail. There's a lot of things there. So if there is a strike, the court can tell you to stop, and you must stop. If you don't, you go to jail. And so we have that idea set. Now, brings in the idea of socialism at this point. I know we've talked about this before. It is economic political theory, social ownership of production. That means everyone owns it. There are no owners. There are no workers. Everyone's there. Self-management, no management. Everyone has the same occupation. Public ownership, again with social, and collectivization, the all for one idea. Three Musketeers, one for all for one, if you will. Now, 1894, we have a big socialist event called Jacob Coxey's Army. This is caused by the Panic of 1883. When they say panic of, it means we're running out of money and the bank's closed. Jacob Coxey is going to march to Washington. Now, famously, there was a big phrase if someone had a lot of food out there, it said, "This is enough food to feed Coxey's army." And so it was kind of a funny phrase, if you will. They are there to protest unemployment. Nothing really much comes of this outside the fact that people are now very fearful of socialism. And this is going to lead them to the mentality of, well, we need to find different avenues of revenue, including Hawaii and imperialism. And this is kind of very, very big. Now, how did they live? They lived in buildings like this here. These are called tenements. We would call them slums or projects today. Some are shaped like a dumbbell. They are low cost, high occupancy housing, meaning lots of people. They're also very poor sanitation. There's no bathrooms. And then you can also see there's like one main fire escape. So if that whole wooden building catches on fire, everyone's going to flock through the stairs and it's going to be chaos. They also are going to breed crime, disease, and poverty. Great movie, can't show you in class, but Gangs of New York, Daniel Day-Lewis, Leonardo DiCaprio, The Tenements are, it's an awesome movie. However, it's also R, so if your parents let you watch stuff like that, you can. If not, there you go. Now, objective 2.4, big business. And we bring in the idea of monopoly. And so, if you ever play Monopoly, here's kind of how I feel about it. Reasons for ending the game Monopoly. You can see the blue, somebody wins. The red, somebody quits after 3 hours. And the green, somebody flipped over the board in a fit of rage. Usually Monopoly is in the green, if you will. Now, at this point, new economic theory called laissez-faire. This means the government will not get involved in business. It translates to let it be, if you will. I also call it hands off. But government will not regulate much or any at all because they believe big business is more effective without limitations. Now, also at this time we have the idea of social Darwinism. This is where we're going to take the ideas of the evolutionist Charles Darwin and we're going to apply them to society and economics. And so now, whereas before it was only the strongest survive, and we're now going to say only the strongest survive in business, the winner takes all mentality, and the really scary one, whatever it takes to be successful, even if that means doing things unethically or that could harm others. Now, types of big business, there's tons of them, and some of these are still legal today. But we have a corporation. Corporation, people buy stock, they own part of the company, and they enjoy the profits. Most stuff sold on Wall Street today is a corporation. A monopoly, which this is illegal. One company controls an entire industrial area, and that's a scary, scary thought. Okay, trust, again, trusts are illegal. Companies in the same field sell their stock and form a board of directors, which the same as a monopoly. A pool is when companies fix prices. And lastly, we have a conglomerate. One corporation owns many other corporations, often in different areas, or from Rocco's Modern Life, great cartoon back in the day, Conglomero. So you have conglomerate, like a conglomerate would be like Procter and Gamble. If you don't know about Procter and Gamble, they more or less make Skippy peanut butter, ragu sauce. They make, gosh, toothpaste. They make soap. Now that's not all made in the same factory. Don't freak out, but they control all of that. And it's kind of weird how that works. Now we come to the robber barons. Many industrialists are going to achieve great wealth. That's what America's about. You work hard, you can make what you want, especially in this laissez-faire. However, this came at the expense of their workers. It also came through dishonest methods. Some of these were price fixing, rebates, bribery, kickbacks, which are going to get some money to the government to keep them quiet, and also intimidation. Now, some famous robber barons we have here, and these are some big ones you need to know. We'll talk about who the king is there in a second. We have Cornelius Vanderbilt. He had a monopoly on steamboats and railroads, and yes, later in life he will donate money to build a university, and this is now Vanderbilt University in Nashville. J.P. Morgan, banks. He had so much money he later buys Carnegie's monopoly. J.P. Morgan, not Morgan and Morgan, that's there, but Chase Bank, etc. We have Andrew Carnegie with steel. He's going to do something. Now, our king here, who had the most money, is John D. Rockefeller with oil. He's the one wearing the crown because you can see he's standing on the Standard Oil, and he controls all that. We also have two minor ones, Jay Gould with railroads and Jim Fisk in finance. These people pop up a ton in different cartoons. We'll do some things in class with them. Now, some very famous methods of creating monopoly are the integration. So we have vertical integration, the picture on the left, and horizontal. Vertical integration is where you buy up your suppliers, your production, and your shipping. Thus, you control every step in the production of a product from the bottom to the top. And so in this case, you can see right here, you control the cattle, the slaughterhouse, the refrigerated railroad cars, the warehouses, the meatpacking plants, the delivery wagons, and the meat industries, all the way up. Okay? Now, horizontal integration is where you buy out competition for the same product, merging with companies to form trust, rebates, or underselling. And so right here, the U.S. Oil Company would go and buy these other ones. Now, horizontal integration, the way I like to have remember it is if you're walking down the hallway and there's a horizontal integration eliminates competition. And let's say everyone's crowding you, you get nervous, and so you karate chop them in the throat. Don't do that for real, it's mean. But when you do that horizontally, while they are down, you have created a monopoly on airspace. You've eliminated your competition, and you have nobody to ward off or make you walk into the wall or whatever. Again, don't do that. But that's just a way to remember it. Now, what do you do with the money? Now, Mark Twain called this the Gilded Age this whole time here. This is where the wealth of the problem hit the few or the many. Now, the big question is, you have all this money, what do you do with it? The idea of philanthropy is going to come up. This is where you give money to help the less fortunate or charitable organizations. And on the picture here, we have Andrew Carnegie. And you can see Andrew Carnegie basically gave to the equivalent of $100 million. On our effort today, billions for the public good. Carnegie is going to have his idea of this because he said the man who dies rich dies disgraced. And so you have that idea, you can't take it with you, etc. And in fact, by the time he retires and gets ready to pass on, he gave away over 90% of his wealth to build universities and libraries and whatever else. Okay? Right. Now, objective 2.5. And so we have political supporters heard about the spoil system. You can see Willy Wonka is really thrilled about this. Now we're going to get into local and government corruption in this whole thing. This is not a good time, is it? So first off, we have the spoil system, because getting a job based on merit is for losers. Again, I have a humorous video I'll talk about in class with this. But government jobs are awarded to political supporters under the spoil system. Often, many people were put in positions they could not handle. Now, the king of the spoil system was President Andrew Jackson. Oh, he was good at it. However, we're going to see what happens in the end with this and why it goes away. Now, in the 1880s, the Republican Party is going to be split into three ways. And so you can see here, you have the stalwarts. Stalwart means you continue straight. And so continue the old ways without changing, like the spoil system. You have the half-breeds, continue with the Republican Party, but get rid of the spoil system. And lastly, you have the mugwumps. These are Republicans who switched to Democrats because of corruption. And so when I heard this whole thing, I found this one. It made me laugh. In the 1880 election, Harry Potter would have been a half-breed with mugwump parents. Just kind of an interesting thing there, because you can see that if you follow Harry Potter, he's not a stalwart. He doesn't want to do things traditionally. However, he does still want to go the way his parents did, but reformed a little bit, and his parents have kind of moved away and distanced themselves, if you will. Now, the election of 1880, Republican half-breed James Garfield is partnered with a stalwart Chester Arthur. This was to keep the Republicans together. Garfield's president, Arthur's vice president. Now, Garfield does not last long. In 1881, he will be assassinated by Charles Guiteau, who said, "I'm a stalwart for the stalwart." And this is a mention to Arthur. And so Chester Arthur becomes president in 1881. We think we've now eliminated this, no more half-breeds, etc. But Arthur is a stalwart, but he introduces a half-breed idea, a civil service reform to end the spoils system. So this is the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, most commonly called just Pendleton Act, 1882. This ends the spoils system, and jobs are now appointed by merit, or what you're able to do. The Civil Service Commission is established to make sure that people are well qualified to do this. This is no different than in life today. You can't just go, "I'm going to be a teacher," and then you go and do it. The spoils system, you could have. Now you have to merit being a teacher, meaning you have to go get an education, you have to pay for it, you have to take a test, you have to pass that test like the Civil Service Commission, then you can apply to be a teacher. That's how that works. Now, a graft, all right? You can see right here, wipe out corruption and the hidden wealth. A graft is another word for political corruption, and often it's used for a politician's pull for personal gain. Okay? Now we have patronage. Now, many cities were controlled by patronage. This simply meant that they had the right to control appointments. So if you were in a city that was democratically run, the Democrats would control who was the dog catcher, who was XYZ, whatever thing it might be. So they have these things there with you. Now, in these cities, you had a pyramid structure of something called a political machine. We won't get too much into the pyramid structure. We'll do that in class, but I just have it there so you can see. It's a political organization run in city politics, organized like a pyramid. What I mean by that is, if you've ever seen the pyramid, they have a wide base, and up at the top, very narrow, meaning at the top, one guy, at the bottom, a lot of people, a lot of underlings, if you will, working. Now it's run by a party boss. The streets are run by captains or ward bosses. Again, Gangs of New York, awesome representation of this, and the most famous one. Which the most famous political machine was called Tammany Hall. And they controlled New York City for years. It was run by a man named Marcy. Yeah, go ahead and snicker. They simply called him Boss Tweed. And so here he is on top of New York's City Hall, and he has all these different arms that what he's controlling, much like an octopus. And we're going to use that octopus to be synonymous with not only political machines, but also monopolies, because one head, and you can touch these multiple things. Right here, you can see all the people he has in control of, right? So you see the police and all these different things. Very, very interesting thing. Now, most immigrants could not read to understand the corruption. Political machines thrived on immigrants, because if you went today, and let's say you went down to one of those processing centers and you said, "Hey, I need 5 people to vote for me," they'd vote for you without asking questions, because it's very simple and easy. Okay, who do I mark? Okay, good. But over the next couple of months, they saw these pictures of Boss Tweed in the newspaper. It was made by Thomas Nast, and they made these political cartoons to expose the corruption of Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed. These appeared in popular magazines such as Puck. If you've ever read A Midsummer's Night Dream by William Shakespeare, Puck is brought in as an imp, or a kind of devilish little character, and he does these little kind of tricks, if you will. I don't know how else to describe it. And so this was the idea. And so from this, political machines are going to have their downfall, because people saw these pictures and didn't want to be associated with this horrible, ghastly man. And we'll talk about stereotypes and why they're fat and all that in class, okay? All right, so that is the end of Objective 2.